Monday morning. William Sterling, the coldest CEO in Silicon Valley, fired 5 directors before lunch. He trusted no one, slept with his phone on airplane mode, audited his own board meetings. Then a broke graduate walked into his war room wearing a $19 blazer, carrying a cracked laptop and a plan. Audrey Constance said she would rebuild his team using the overlooked. William almost laughed. In 45 days, the market would witness his trust explode into flames. The glass walls of Sterling Systems reflected nothing but red. Dashboard after dashboard glowed with failure metrics. Aegis, their flagship product, had missed 2 critical milestones. The burn rate climbed, while the pass rate for UI tests sat at 62%. Mean time to recovery exceeded 6 hours. William Sterling stood at the head of the conference table, his fingers drumming a familiar rhythm against the glass. It was the rhythm he tapped when doubt crept in, when control slipped away. 5 directors sat before him, their slides pristine, their excuses polished. He cut them off mid-sentence. The words came cold and precise. They were done. Security would escort them out. No severance discussions today, just emptied desks and revoked access badges. By noon, the war room stood empty, except for William and the head of HR, who clutched a manila folder like a life preserver. Inside was a single resume. Audrey Constance, 24 years old, state school graduate, applied for junior operations coordinator. The position paid $48,000 a year. She had requested an immediate interview, claiming she could solve their trust problem. William almost dismissed it. Almost. But the precision of her application caught his attention. She had analyzed their public commits, mapped their deployment failures, identified patterns in their outage reports, all from outside their walls. Audrey entered wearing a blazer from a discount rack, the price tag's adhesive ghost still visible on the sleeve. Her laptop bore a crack across the corner, held together with clear tape. She didn't apologize for her appearance. She didn't make small talk. She placed a single sheet of paper on the glass table. It contained 3 columns. Problems observed. Root causes suspected. Solution proposed. Each entry corresponded to a public failure Sterling Systems had experienced in the last quarter. William's drumming stopped. She didn't want to tell him about her achievements. She had none that would impress him. Instead, she wanted 2 things. First, permission to run a Shadow Sprint 0 for 72 hours. Second, full access to their actual logs, their real backlog, their unfiltered metrics. No sanitized reports, no prettified dashboards, raw data. She would use it to find talent the traditional way had missed. People whose resumes got filtered out, people whose interviews went nowhere because they lacked the right keywords, the right degrees, the right pedigree. She called it the overlooked method. William studied her cracked laptop, her discount blazer, her steady gaze. The board wanted results in 45 days. They had scheduled demo day with Vivian Larissa, the lead representative from their primary venture fund. If Aegis failed to demonstrate meaningful progress, the fund could activate their replacement clause. William would lose his company. He had fired everyone with impressive credentials, everyone with perfect presentations, everyone who interviewed well. Perhaps it was time to try something different. He agreed to Audrey's terms with conditions. Every change would be logged and audited. If she failed, she would leave the company permanently. No second chances. The 45-day clock started now. The Shadow Sprint 0 began at 6 a.m. Tuesday. Audrey transformed an unused conference room into what she called the audition space. No desks, no hierarchy. Just problems and solutions. She pulled real tickets from their backlog. Authentication service timing out under load. Payment processing dropping transactions. a 9,000-line module that no one understood anymore. She posted these problems publicly within the company. Anyone could try solving them. 3 hours to submit a solution. No resume required. No interview. Just code, analysis, or process improvements. Otis Zane appeared first, 33 years old, site reliability engineer working night shifts in the operations center. His personnel file showed 3 failed promotion attempts. Not enough leadership presence, the note said. Too quiet in meetings. Otis took the authentication timeout ticket. Within 90 minutes, he had written a 3-step rollback runbook. He demonstrated a full recovery in 15 seconds. His documentation included failure scenarios, monitoring thresholds, and automated triggers. It was surgical in its precision. Gwen Matilda arrived next. 31. Quality assurance engineer who had transitioned from teaching high school chemistry. Her manager had marked her as adequate but not exceptional. She selected the test coverage problem. In 3 hours, she converted 10 end-to-end tests into gating tests that would run on every commit. She identified 37% of recurring bugs that these gates would have caught. Her approach was methodical, almost militaristic in its discipline. Liam Oliver showed up during his lunch break. 29, self-taught developer. His GitHub repository was chaos, but his code was clean. He had been rejected 3 times for senior positions. No computer science degree, the feedback noted. Liam chose the 9,000-line monster module. He read through it like others read novels. In 3 hours, he submitted a proof of concept, 400 lines of refactored code that maintained backward compatibility while improving readability. He proposed breaking the monolith into 4 distinct layers, each with clear boundaries and contracts. Bridget Serena was the last to arrive, 27, project manager from a small nonprofit. She had applied for 6 different positions at Sterling Systems over 2 years. All rejections cited lack of enterprise experience. Bridget didn't take a technical ticket. Instead, she gathered the scattered requirements from 17 different stakeholders and consolidated them into 4 measurable outcomes. Time to first byte under 200 milliseconds. Crash rate below 0.3%. User onboarding under 60 seconds. Admin tools that required no training. Each outcome had success criteria, measurement methods, and dependency maps. By Thursday evening, the 72-hour sprint had ended. The continuous integration pipeline had shifted from red to yellow. 12 tickets marked as abandoned were now closed. William watched the progress from his office, pulling logs every hour. There were no slides, no presentations, just commits, merges, and deployments. Audrey had given him visibility into the actual work, not the performance of work. His fingers had stopped drumming. Friday brought the first collision with existing power structures. Corbin Dante, the temporary chief operating officer, had held the role for 4 months since the previous COO's departure. 42 years old with 15 years at Sterling Systems. He had built what employees privately called the fear matrix. Every decision required multiple approvals. Every change needed 3 signatures. Every deployment had to pass through his newly formed standards committee. It was control masquerading as quality assurance. Corbin appeared in the war room during Audrey's first status update to William. He carried a bound document labeled Process Compliance Framework. Every page detailed violations that Audrey's shadow sprint had committed. Unauthorized access to production logs. Unapproved modifications to testing protocols. Direct commits without committee review. He placed the document between William and Audrey like evidence in a trial. His message was clear. This chaos had to stop. Audrey responded with a different document. She called it Safe to Try. Patches deemed low risk could deploy to 2% of internal users. Automatic rollback triggers would activate if metrics degraded. Lead time from commit to production would drop from 18 hours to 2. Each rule had an exception handler. Each exception had an audit trail. It was controlled flexibility, measured risk, documented trust. She placed her document next to Corbin's. The contrast was stark. At 2:17 a.m. Saturday morning, William sat alone in his home office. His phone was off, as always, but he had remote access to the deployment logs. He watched Otis Zane respond to a memory leak in real time. Detection at 2:17. Analysis by 2:17 and 30 seconds. Rollback initiated at 2:18. System stable at 2:18 and 13 seconds. Every action was logged. Every decision was documented. Otis had operated without committees, without approvals, without hierarchy, just competence and accountability. William made a decision. He signed Audrey's safe-to-try proposal with limitations. Changes below a risk threshold could proceed without committee approval. But everything would be audited. Everything would be measured. Trust, but verify. It was a crack in Corbin's matrix, small but significant. The first 10 days of the new operating rhythm began Monday of week 2. Audrey established what she called rituals. Not meetings. Rituals. The no-blame post-mortem happened after every incident. No finger-pointing, no punishment. Just 3 items. Root cause. Systemic fix. Who would teach the team about the lesson learned? The responsibility to teach was not a punishment, but an honor. It meant you understood the system deeply enough to help others avoid the same mistake. She created the Transparency Trust Board, a simple display showing who had deployment rights for which types of changes. Risk thresholds were public. Rollback criteria were visible. Everyone knew who could do what and under what circumstances. No hidden permissions. No secret authorities. Just clear, documented trust levels that could be earned through demonstrated competence. The pod office hours ran for 30 minutes each day. Anyone from any team could come to Audrey's pod and present a problem. The pod would either solve it immediately or teach the presenter how to solve it themselves. No tickets, no formal requests. Just engineers. Helping engineers. Knowledge flowing without bureaucracy. The metrics began shifting. Mean time to recovery dropped from 6 hours to 1 hour 50 minutes. Build pass rates climbed from 62% to 79%. Duplicate bugs decreased by 48%. More importantly, Henry Flynn, the head of engineering, who had submitted his resignation, withdrew it. He agreed to architect Aegis Edge, a critical component that had been stalled for months. The culture was changing. People were staying. Day 15 marked the midpoint. The internal demo. No executives were invited. Just engineers. Showing engineers what they had built. Gwen demonstrated how critical UI errors had dropped 48% after implementing her gating tests. The data was clean, undeniable. Liam presented his refactoring progress. From 9,000 lines to 2,400, performance improved by 35%. Test coverage reached 82%. The code was readable, maintainable, alive again. Bridget had transformed the roadmap from a wish list to a commitment. Each week had outcomes. Each outcome had measurable criteria. Each criterion had an assigned pod. The ambiguity that had plagued Aegis was evaporating. Engineers knew what to build. Product knew what to expect. Sales knew what to promise. The alignment was visible in the metrics and in the faces of the team. But success bred suspicion. That evening, an anonymous blog post appeared on a popular tech forum. It contained exact quotes from the internal demo. not paraphrases, not summaries. Word for word, transcriptions of slides that had never left the building. Bridget noticed it first. The formatting was distinctive. The spacing between bullets, the use of M dashes instead of hyphens. These were signatures as unique as handwriting. Someone inside was leaking. William's paranoia returned with force. His fingers drummed against his desk as he read the blog post. Trust had been violated. The exact thing he feared was happening. But Audrey didn't panic. She proposed a forensic trail. Every document would be slightly modified for each recipient. Tiny changes. A space here. A punctuation mark there. Invisible to readers, but traceable to sources. If another leak occurred, they would know exactly who had shared it. William agreed, but went further. He gave Audrey limited trust authority. She could approve changes below risk thresholds without his signature. She could investigate security concerns without committee oversight. It was the first time in 2 years William had delegated any real authority. The drumming stopped, but the tension remained. Week 3 brought escalation. Corbin recognized his power eroding. The Standards Committee was being bypassed. The fear matrix was dissolving. He needed to reassert control. His first move was subtle. He contacted the vendor providing their testing infrastructure. He requested extended maintenance. 5 days. The testing pipeline that Gwen had built would be crippled. Without gates, bad code would flow to production. Incidents would spike. Audrey's approach would be blamed. The maintenance notice arrived Monday morning, effective immediately. Gwen discovered it when her test suite failed to initialize. Within an hour, Audrey's pod had assembled. They couldn't fight the vendor, but they could adapt. Liam suggested containerizing a minimal test environment. Otis provided spare compute capacity from the night shift resources. Bridget coordinated with affected teams. Gwen rebuilt her gates using the constrained resources. The tests were fewer but focused. Smoke tests only. Critical paths only. It was not ideal, but it was enough. Corbin's second move was political. He issued an internal directive. Any deployment that bypassed the Standards Committee would be subject to disciplinary review. The implied threat was clear. Follow the process or risk your job. The directive was copied to the board, to Vivian Larissa, to every stakeholder. It was a public challenge to William's authority. Audrey's response was tactical. She scheduled deployments for after 10 p.m. during off-peak hours. She called them night ops. Lower risk, due to reduced traffic. Full rollback capabilities. Double logging to both standard and backup repositories. If Corbin wanted to review the deployments, he would have to stay up all night. Few managers did. The third week ended with a team that had learned to operate in shadows. They deployed at night. They tested with minimal resources. They documented everything twice. They were building muscle memory for survival. What Corbin didn't realize was that adversity was making them stronger. Every constraint forced innovation. Every obstacle built resilience. Day 23 began with rain hammering the glass walls of Sterling systems. At 12:23 a.m., alerts fired across the monitoring systems. CPU spiking. Response times climbing. Time to first byte exceeded 800 milliseconds. The dashboard flashed from green to yellow to red in seconds. This was not normal failure. This was intentional. Otis was first to respond. He isolated the traffic patterns. Requests were coming from an administrative account that should have been deactivated months ago. The requests were malformed but valid. They passed authentication but triggered expensive operations. It was a deliberate attack designed to look like incompetence. Audrey's pod operated like a surgical team. Otis redirected traffic to a degraded mode. The system stayed up but with reduced functionality. Liam activated feature flags to disable the compromised modules. The attacking requests hit walls of nulls. Bridget coordinated communication. Status updates every 5 minutes. Clear. Factual. No speculation. Gwen ran chaos tests against the degraded system to ensure stability. By 2 a.m., the system was stable. But Audrey wasn't done. She pulled the forensic logs. Every request had metadata, IP addresses, timestamps, user agents. She cross-referenced these with the building's access logs. The attacks originated from inside Sterling systems, more specifically from the executive floor, more specifically from a conference room booked by Corbin's team for a late-night strategy session. The smoking gun came from the authentication logs. The compromised administrative account had been reactivated using credentials that required director-level access. Only 3 people had such access: William, the head of security, and Corbin. The security head had been on vacation for a week. William had been home, his access logs clean. That left Corbin. William arrived at 3 a.m. He never came to the office this early, but the incident had triggered his personal alerts. He found Audrey's pod still working, surrounded by printouts of logs, timelines, and access patterns. They had built a forensic case that would hold up in any investigation. Timestamps aligned. Access patterns matched. Even the script that triggered the attack had signatures. Variable naming conventions. Comment styles. Indentation patterns. It matched code Corbin had written years ago for a different system. William's transformation happened in that moment. This wasn't healthy paranoia. This wasn't competitive pressure. This was sabotage. His company was being attacked from within by someone he had trusted with operational control. The drumming stopped completely. His fingers went still. He looked at Audrey, at her exhausted pod, at the evidence they had assembled while under attack. They had protected his company while building the case against the attacker. Trust wasn't the vulnerability. Trust with the wrong people was. The next days were spent preparing for the board review. Audrey built what she called the trust map. It showed every permission in the system, who had granted it, when it was granted, how it was used. Every node had an audit trail. Every edge had a justification. The map revealed patterns. Corbin had been slowly accumulating permissions. Small increases over months. Each individually reasonable, collectively dangerous. She created timelines that showed the correlation between Corbin's actions and system failures. The maintenance window that crippled testing. The blog leak that matched his writing patterns. The attack that originated from his team's conference room. No single piece was conclusive. Together, they painted a picture of deliberate sabotage. Henry Flynn worked with the pod to prepare the technical demonstration. Each person would present 2 to 3 facts. No emotions. No accusations. Just data. Otis would show the 13-second rollback. Gwen would demonstrate the 48% error reduction. Liam would present the performance improvements. Bridget would display the on-time delivery metrics. They rehearsed until every word was precise. William prepared his opening. Trust equals verification plus empowerment. They had been doing both. The verification had caught sabotage. The empowerment had prevented disaster. He would not apologize for trusting. He would demonstrate why trust, properly implemented, was stronger than control. Day 35. The 45-day review had been moved up due to the incident. The boardroom was glass and steel. Vivian Larissa sat at the head of the table, flanked by legal counsel and internal auditors. The venture fund had sent their full team. This was not a progress review. This was a trial. Corbin spoke first. He accused Audrey's pod of recklessness, of breaking established processes, of creating vulnerabilities that had led to the incident. He demanded that Aegis be paused for a full re-standardization. His presentation was polished. His slides were perfect. His confidence was absolute. Audrey responded with the access graph, a single visualization showing permissions over time. She zoomed into specific moments: the reactivation of the administrative account, the correlation with Corbin's access logs. She presented the 13-second rollback video. No audio, just terminal screens and timestamps. The precision was surgical. William presented the evidence of sabotage: the script signatures matching Corbin's code, the timing alignment with the conference room booking, the blog leak with linguistic patterns matching Corbin's writing. He didn't accuse. He just presented facts. The room was silent, except for the hum of projectors. Bridget added the final piece. She had found other blog posts, other leaks, all with the same linguistic signatures. The patterns went back months. Before Audrey arrived, before the pod was formed. The sabotage was not reactive. It was ongoing. Corbin had been undermining Sterling's systems while positioning himself as the solution. Vivian's decision was swift. Corbin was suspended pending a full investigation. Aegis would continue under Audrey's framework. William would remain as CEO, but with a commitment to institutionalize the new culture. The trust framework would be codified. The pod structure would be formalized. The company would be rebuilt on competence, not credentials. The morning after launch day arrived quiet and bright. The 28th floor lobby was empty. Morning sun pooled on the steel railings of the glass barriers. The dashboard still glowed green, its graphs oscillating smooth as steady breathing. William walked slowly through the darkened war room. On the table sat a paper cup with Audrey's faint fingerprints. Beside it, the access graph document bound neatly, a silver paperclip attached to its cover. He stopped before the wall of postmortems. In the center hung the most recent one, the lessons learned section handwritten in slanted, decisive strokes. His expression softened. His fingers hovered at the paper's edge, then dropped away, acknowledging something already clear. In her office, the overlooked scholarship envelope waited on Audrey's desk. No card attached, just a thin header printed at the top. For those who were once overlooked. When Audrey opened the door, the room filled with the pure light of early morning. She saw the envelope, looked through the glass window at the sun cresting the building opposite. A deep breath. No one spoke. Nothing needed to be said. In the far corner, William passed through the glass corridor. They caught each other through 2 layers of reflection: sky, glass, and a glance. No gesture to call back. Just a moment of stillness, long enough for silence to say everything that needed saying. She placed the envelope in her drawer, kept the silver paperclip on the document's edge, like an invisible bookmark between verification and empowerment. 3 months later, the small classroom of the overlooked academy within the company. On the whiteboard was the roadmap for 1 to 4 week auditions. In the corner stood a new bookshelf holding the test handbooks of Gwen Matilda, Otis Zane, Liam Oliver, and Bridget Serena. Audrey walked along the row of chairs, adjusting a marker that had rolled to the table's edge, stopping at the window. Her face was relaxed. Her hair caught the sunlight. In her hands was a fabric-covered notebook, its spine held by that same silver paperclip from a year ago. On the balcony opposite, William Sterling stood beside a small potted plant. Afternoon light fell across his jacket shoulder. The weekly report was open on his tablet. He looked up, catching sight of the classroom window. The distance was far but clear as a straight line connecting 2 points. Both lowered their eyes to their unfinished work. No waves, No performed smiles. Just breathing slowing. An unspoken understanding. Trust had found its home, and affection, light as dust in sunbeam, was exactly where it should be. The right amount, the right time. Late afternoon, wind pushed the window curtain up a small gap, revealing the silver paperclip gleaming on Audrey's notebook spine. Across the way, William closed his tablet, placed a small stone on the plant's soil. No one spoke. An open ending, gentle and lasting, like a commitment that needed no signature. The metrics would continue improving. The pod structure would spread to other teams. The overlooked academy would graduate 17 engineers in its first year. But those were just numbers. The real change was simpler. Sterling Systems had learned to trust, not blindly, not completely, but deliberately, with verification, with empowerment, with the understanding that competence could come from anywhere. Corbin's investigation would reveal years of subtle sabotage. He would be terminated with cause. He would sue. He would lose. The legal documents would fill boxes. But that was just cleanup. The real victory had already been won in 72 hours of shadow sprints, in 13-second rollbacks, in silent cooperation at 2 in the morning. Henry Flynn would architect 3 more critical systems. Gwen Matilda would become head of quality engineering. Liam Oliver would refactor the entire legacy codebase. Bridget Serena would restructure product management around outcomes instead of features. Otis Zane would build an automated response system that would become the industry standard. They were no longer the overlooked. They were the foundation. Audrey would never use the title senior, or director, or vice president. She remained simply Audrey Constance, architect of reliable operations. Her office door stayed open. Her pod hours never stopped. Her methods would be studied, copied, and misunderstood by companies that wanted the results without the trust. They would fail. Trust could not be implemented. It had to be built, verified, and empowered. One 13-second rollback at a time. William would learn to sleep without airplane mode. He would stop auditing his board. He would cease the finger drumming that had marked his doubt. He would still verify. That would never change. But verification was no longer about catching failure. It was about confirming success. The distinction mattered. The silver paperclip would remain on Audrey's notebook. Small, functional, unremarkable, except to those who knew its history. It had held together the access graph that exposed sabotage. It had marked the page where trust was codified. Now it simply held papers that documented a culture where the overlooked could thrive. It needed no explanation. Its presence was enough. On the last Friday of each month, William and Audrey would pass in the glass corridor. They would not schedule it. It would just happen. A brief acknowledgement. A shared understanding. The company they had rebuilt together continued growing around them. Trust was no longer a vulnerability to be managed. It was an asset to be invested. The return on that investment could be measured in metrics, in retention, in delivered products. But the real return was simpler. People stayed. People grew. People who had been overlooked were now essential. The rain would return to Silicon Valley. The dashboards would occasionally flash red. Incidents would occur. Mistakes would be made. But the response was different now. No blame. Just learning. No politics. Just data. No fear. Just the steady work of engineers who trusted each other enough to admit failure, to share knowledge, to deploy at 2 in the morning knowing that someone would be watching, ready to help if needed. Sterling Systems would go public 18 months later. The IPO documents would credit the turnaround to innovative management structures and improved engineering practices. The real story was simpler. A CEO who learned to trust. A graduate who knew where to find talent. A team that chose competence over credentials. A culture that valued verification and empowerment equally. A company rebuilt, not with perfect people but with overlooked ones who, given the chance, proved extraordinary. The silver paperclip would be framed eventually. Not in gold or crystal, just simple wood and glass. It would hang in the overlooked academy classroom. No plaque. No explanation. Just a small, functional object that had held together something important while it was being built. Students would ask about it. Audrey would smile, adjust a marker on someone's desk, and begin the lesson on 13-second rollbacks. The story didn't need to be told. It was being lived, one verified trust decision at a time.